Welcome to another video on SPC 229 schema. I'm your host and committee vice chair, Jason Glazer. Today we are covering 4 closely related data groups for surface water heating equipment, surface water heating validation point, heat pump water heater capacity validation point, and heat pump water heater power validation point. I'm trying something new this week due to my availability, and the ballot and the video are being released together. Hopefully we will not run into too many issues, and if any minor changes are needed, we can be handled in a future small ballot. Today's video is the second of 3 videos covering the surface water heating systems. The first video covered how everything is connected up. This second video covers the most common equipment and associated validation points. The third video will cover other equipment in the distribution system, as well as specifying the usage. And we'll be covering tank, solar, thermal, and surface water heating use on the next video. Remember that the schema is intended to aid in validating that the transformation between the user's model and the baseline model is done correctly, and is not intended to be a universal model of everything that appears in a building or can be modeled in a simulation program. As a reminder, if you primarily have a 90.1 background, you may notice that this part of the schema seems a little bit more detailed than necessary. That is because this part of the schema is heavily influenced on the needs of Title 24, which has a more in-depth description of surface water heating for both residential and non-residential buildings. For an Appendix G submittal, only a small subset of the data elements are likely to be modeled. So let me show you how things are connected first. So the root element, of course, is the ASHRAE 229, which has a child of rule set model instance. And that points to, or has a child of surface water heating equipment. And then all the other data groups we're covering today are children of that. Now, rule set model instance also covers service distribution systems and surface water heat piping, which we covered last time. And next time we'll be covering surface heating, surface water heating use, solar, thermal, and tank. But for today, we're just covering on this first box. So here's the schema for surface water heating equipment. As usual, there's a ID, reporting, name, and notes fields that are right at the top that go along with pretty much all the data groups. After that, not surprisingly, is a field called heater fuel type, which has an enumeration for different energy source options. The surface water heating distribution system is a reference to the distribution system and piping data groups that we covered last time. These next group of fields are all various metrics that are used for surface water heating, including energy factor, thermal efficiency, standby loss fraction, uniform energy fraction, and first hour rating. These are all ratios except for first hour rating, which is a volume. Output validation points we'll be discussing in a little bit more detail, but essentially it's a list of performance points that describe the part load performance of hot water equipment. Input power, rated capacity, and minimum capacity are all expressed in terms of power and watts, and describe the overall performance of the water heater. Recovery efficiency is another metric having to do with surface water heating, commonly applied for the efficiency of how the unit operates. The first control item is set point temperature, which describes the thermostat on the water heater that controls the temperature of the water delivered by the water heater. The next few items we'll be describing all have to do with the compressor in a heat pump water heater. So for a standard water heater that doesn't have a heat pump cycle, they are not used at all. The first is a simple string for the compressor location. It is used basically just to describe where it is located. If that's not needed, or I'm sorry, that is not needed if a specific zone is used instead, which is the next one. So this is a reference to the zone that the compressor is located in. For some larger heat pump water heaters, the heat rejection is in a different location than where the compressor is located. So for the source, compressor heat rejection source is an enumeration of possible locations where the heat is basically taken from for the heat pump cycle. And the zone is a reference to the zone if the rejection source is a zone. These validation point data groups for the compressor we'll be talking about in a few minutes. For a combustion water heater, the draft fan power and has electric ignition are used to first describe the fan power for the combustion fan, and the second is a Boolean for whether or not it has electric ignition. If it does not have electric ignition, it's assumed to have a standing pilot. The heater type goes over is an enumeration for the list of types of water heaters it is. And tank is a reference to the tank that stores the hot water. We'll be talking about that more next time. Status type is a enumeration related to Title 24, specifically on whether something is new or existing. Solar thermal systems is points to the children of another data group that would be a child of this one, and actually multiple children could be possible that describe the solar thermal systems that would be applied for the water heater if they're present. And similarly, hot water loop points to, in this case, a fluid loop. If it's part of the hot water system. In this case, this is the fluid loop that would be either being used to provide heat to the service water hot system, or in describing a combination space and surface water heating piece of equipment. So let's go over the enumerations a little bit more. So the first one that I mentioned was energy source options. So not surprisingly, we've talked about this one before. It's used in several different data groups. It has fairly typical options for you'd expect for energy sources. Component location, I think we've also talked about before. This is another enumeration, and it includes places where a particular component is described. If in zone is chosen, then you have to reference the specific zone. But then there are other options also for where something is located that is not specifically related to a zone or a specific zone, and basically just sets the boundary conditions for the outside of the equipment. And the next one is service water heating options. And this describes the type of surface water heater there is. So conventional is probably the most typical these days. And then there'd be two different types of heat pump. options. One is packaged, where everything is in a single unit, and then split, where the heat rejection is located in a different place. And then two that would be related to having that fluid loop connection. One is that the heat is from a hot water loop, and the other is for combination service and space equipment. The final enumeration for this data group is this Title 24 enumeration that we've also seen before on other data element or data groups, where it shows if it's new, altered, existing, or existing plus new. So that's it for the service water heating equipment data group. The next item to discuss today is these validation points. So the first validation point is called Service Water Heating Validation Point, and basically describes, well, first of all, it's always 1 point, but used as a list of points. And it's used to validate the performance of a water heater if the rule set had a specific performance requirement that describes the part load efficiency of the water heater. So the load and the power required would be the two inputs there. The next one is heat pump water heater capacity validation point. For heat pumps, this validation point is also used in a list, but describes just 1 point that's validated. It is focused on the capacity as is related to the operating temperatures and flows on the air and water side of the heat pump. The next data group is heat pump water power validation point. It's very similar to the last one. It also validates points and shows the resulting power needed for operating conditions and a specific load on the water heater. So that's it for today. Thanks again for watching the video. I hope you have comments that you can provide related to this. Please go ahead and do so by email. Thank you very much. Talk to you next time.